The carriage rattled through the iron gates of Thornmere Hall as the last light bled out of the sky. Marcus Ashdown, 6th Duke of Thornmere, sat rigid against the leather seat, his jaw set in a line that had not softened for 6 years. The estate spread before him like a dark memory, stone and shadow, and the weight of a name he had never wanted. "Home, Your Grace," the coachman called. Marcus did not answer. He stepped down onto the gravel and inhaled the damp English air. It smelled of wet earth and old trees and something else he could not name. The house loomed ahead, windows dark except for a few servant candles. No welcome party, no banners, just silence. The steward, Mr. Pell, appeared at the door with a bow so deep it looked painful. "Your Grace, we were not expecting you until Michaelmas." "I sent word from Dover," Marcus said, stripping off his gloves. "The letter must have been delayed." Pell straightened. In the lantern light his face looked pale and careful. "Of course, Your Grace, the household is at your disposal." Marcus moved into the great hall, where his footsteps echoed off the marble. The portraits of his ancestors stared down from their gilded frames, stern men with powdered wigs and dead eyes. His father's portrait hung at the end of the row, painted 3 years before Marcus had left England. The late Duke's expression was one of practiced authority, the same look he had worn while signing ruinous orders and silencing anyone who questioned him. "I want a full report," Marcus said. "The accounts, the tenants, the household staff, tomorrow morning." Pell hesitated. "There is one matter, Your Grace. It concerns the East Wing." Marcus turned. "The East Wing has been closed for years, my father's doing." 7 years, Your Grace." The steward's voice dropped. "The door has remained locked since the day the girl was taken there." The word hung in the air. Girl. Marcus had been 22 when he left England. He remembered whispers about the East Wing, about strange sounds at night, about a governess dismissed without reference. But his father had crushed all questions the way he crushed everything else. "Show me," Marcus said. The corridor leading to the East Wing was cold enough to show breath. Dust lay thick on the floor, undisturbed for months. The servants had clearly avoided this place. Marcus walked with his lantern raised, the flame throwing restless shadows against the walls. Pell followed a few steps behind, saying nothing. At the end of the corridor stood a door of dark oak, reinforced with iron bands. A heavy padlock hung from the latch, rusted but solid. "Where is the key?" Marcus asked. Pell swallowed. "The old Duke kept it on his person. After he died, we searched his chambers. We found nothing." Marcus set down the lantern. He unbuttoned his coat and handed it to Pell without ceremony. Then he raised his boot and kicked the door just below the lock. The wood cracked. He kicked again. The lock held. A third blow splintered the frame, and the door swung inward with a shriek of old hinges. The smell that rushed out was not decay. It was clean, strangely clean. Lavender and soap and the faint trace of wood smoke from a small grate. Marcus stepped inside. The room was not a prison cell. It was a modest bedchamber carefully kept, a narrow bed with white linens, a writing desk beneath a high window, a shelf of worn books. A fire burned low in the grate, casting warm light across the walls. And in the center of the room stood a young woman. She was dressed in a simple gray gown, her dark hair pinned back from a face that held no fear. Her eyes were the color of winter sea, gray-blue and steady. She did not scream or cower. She simply looked at him, as if she had been waiting for this moment for a very long time. "Who are you?" Marcus demanded. The woman inclined her head. "Eleanor Vane." The name struck him like a blade. He knew it. He had heard it whispered in London drawing rooms years ago, before the scandals had been buried. The Vane family destroyed by a forgery, their estate seized, the father dead by his own hand. The mother had vanished. The daughter had been 17. "Why are you here?" Marcus asked, his voice low. Eleanor stepped toward the writing desk and lifted a folded paper. Her movements were calm, deliberate. She held the paper out to him. Because your father gave me two choices, she said. Sign a false statement admitting my father was a traitor or spend the rest of my life in this room. A faint, bitter smile touched her lips. I chose the door. Marcus did not take the paper. His mind was roaring, rearranging everything he thought he knew about his father. The late Duke had been cruel, yes. Cold, yes. But this was monstrous. That is difficult to believe, he said. Aliner's smile faded. Read the document, Your Grace. It is in your father's own hand. A confession to the ruin of my family. Signed, sealed, and kept here because he was too arrogant to destroy it and too afraid to let it leave. Marcus stared at her. She did not look away. There was no pleading in her eyes, no desperation. Just a quiet, unbreakable dignity that made his chest feel suddenly tight. He reached out and took the paper. The paper was old, the ink faded but legible. He unfolded it slowly. And there, at the bottom, was the familiar signature of the 5th Duke of Thornmere. The words above it were worse than any crime his father had ever been accused of. Marcus looked up. Aliner stood before him, a prisoner released by force, a woman who had spent 7 years in a room because she refused to lie. You are free, he said. Aliner shook her head. Not yet. That document is only half the truth. The other half is in London, and it is still alive. The fire crackled. Somewhere in the house, a clock began to strike midnight. Then we will find it, Marcus said. Aliner's gaze held his. For the first time since he had broken the door, he saw something flicker in her expression. Not hope exactly, but a fierce, guarded possibility. You believe me? She asked. Marcus folded the document and tucked it inside his coat. I believe my father was capable of anything, he said, and I believe you have been silent long enough. Part 2. The weight of paper. The fire had burned down to embers by the time Marcus finished speaking with Aliner Vane. He had ordered Pell to prepare a proper room in the family wing, to light the fires, to bring hot water and food. The steward had obeyed with trembling hands, his eyes darting to Aliner as if she were a ghost made flesh. The servants whispered in corners. Marcus heard the word East Wing repeated more than once before his glare silenced them. Now he sat alone in his father's study, the confession spread across the desk. The candles had burned low. Outside, a thin rain began to fall, streaking the windows like tears. The document was damning. In precise, formal language, the late Duke described how he had arranged for false evidence to be planted against Sir Richard Vane, letters supposedly proving Vane had sold military secrets to French agents during the brief peace of 1809. The evidence had been fabricated. Witnesses had been bribed. Sir Richard had been arrested, publicly humiliated, and stripped of his lands. He had hanged himself in a debtor's prison before his trial could begin. And Aliner had known. She had been 17 years old, and she had known the truth. Marcus leaned back in the chair, his father's portrait looming above the mantelpiece. How had the old man lived with himself? How had he walked these halls, attended church, dined with peers, all while a girl rotted in the East Wing? A knock at the door broke his thoughts. Enter, he said. It was Aliner. She had changed into a dark blue gown that must have been salvaged from some forgotten trunk. It was too long, too loose at the shoulders, but she wore it with the same quiet composure she had worn the gray dress. Her hair was still damp from washing, braided simply at her neck. I should not intrude, she said, but I heard you were still awake. Marcus gestured to the chair opposite the desk. Sit, please. She sat. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The rain pattered against the glass. You have questions, Aliner said. I have many questions, Marcus replied. The first is why you did not attempt to escape. The window in that room was high but not impossible. The door was locked, but the servants brought you food. There were moments of opportunity. Aliner folded her hands in her lap. I tried, twice. The first time I broke the window glass and climbed onto the ledge. I fell and injured my leg. The second time, I managed to reach the stables. Your father's men found me before I could saddle a horse. After that, he told me that if I attempted to leave again, he would ensure my mother's grave was desecrated and her body thrown into a common pit. Marcus went very still. Your mother is dead. She died when I was 15. Consumption. Alina's voice was steady, but her hands tightened slightly. I could not bear the thought of her resting in unhallowed ground, so I stayed. The fire popped. A log shifted, sending up a shower of sparks. And after my father died, Marcus asked, the servants would have been less vigilant. You could have walked out. Alina met his eyes. Your father's steward, Mr. Pell, told me the new duke was abroad. He said he had orders to keep the east wing locked until your return. He gave me food and water, but he would not release me. He was afraid of what I knew, and afraid of what might happen if the truth came out. Marcus felt a cold anger building in his chest. Pell knew. The whole time Pell knew. He is a coward, Alina said. Not a villain. He did not hurt me. He simply did nothing. Marcus stood and walked to the window. The rain was falling harder now, driven by a rising wind. His reflection stared back at him, a stranger with his father's face in a house full of sins. I will dismiss him, Marcus said, and I will bring you to London. The confession will be presented to the proper authorities. Your family's name will be restored. Alina rose from her chair. And what do you want in return, Your Grace? He turned. She stood with her back straight, her chin lifted. Even in her ill-fitting dress, she looked like a woman who had never once begged. I want nothing, Marcus said. That is not true. Alina took a step toward him. Everyone wants something. Your father wanted my silence. Mr. Pell wanted his comfort. What do you want? The question hung between them. Marcus felt the strange pull of her gaze, the way she refused to look away, the way she had looked at him when he broke the door. I want to be nothing like my father, he said quietly. Alina studied him for a long moment. Then she nodded, as if she had found something in his face that satisfied her. Very well, she said. We leave for London in the morning. She turned and walked to the door. Her hand was on the latch when she paused. One more thing, she said without turning. The document mentions a third party, the man who carried the forged letters to London. He is the key to proving the forgery. If he is still alive, he must be found. Do you know his name? Marcus asked. Alina turned her head slightly. No, but I know his face, and I know he still serves the people who helped destroy my father. She opened the door and was gone, leaving Marcus alone with the rain and the weight of paper. He did not sleep that night. At dawn, a rider left Thornmere Hall carrying a message to the family's London solicitor. 2 hours later, a second rider followed, this one unsanctioned, sent by a steward who feared losing his place. Marcus watched from his window as the rider disappeared into the gray morning. The secret of the East Wing was no longer locked, and it was already moving. Part 3. The Lady in the Dark. London in April was a city of contradictions, bright carriages splashing through dark puddles, elegant facades hiding cramped interiors, polite smiles masking sharp calculations. Marcus's townhouse on Cavendish Square stood in the heart of Mayfair, a stern brick building with white shutters and a black lacquered door. It had been his mother's house once, before she had retired to Bath and left him to the care of servants and tutors. Now it became a fortress. Alina Vane arrived under the name of Mrs. Alina Gray, a distant cousin from Cumberland recently widowed and in mourning for a husband who had never existed. The servants were told to be discreet. The carriage was brought through the mews. The curtains on the second floor remained half-drawn. You understand that the ton will talk, Marcus said as he led Alina into the drawing room. They always talk. Alina moved to the window and looked out at the square. Let them. I have been talked about before. It did not kill me then. Marcus watched her for a moment. In the pale London light, she looked different, less like a prisoner and more like a woman who had been waiting her whole life for this moment. Her morning dress was plain black, unadorned, but it made her look elegant rather than diminished. "You will need an introduction to society," he said. "I will host a small dinner, a few carefully chosen guests who can help your cause." Alina turned. "And what cause will you present? A widow of no family, no fortune, no connections. They will see through it within an hour." "Then we give them something else to see," Marcus said. "A woman of quiet dignity who has suffered greatly and asks for nothing. That is more disarming than any title." Alina's lips curved slightly. "You understand society better than I expected." "I spent 6 years on the continent," Marcus said. "I observed a great deal. The French are more honest about their cruelty. The English hide it behind teacups." That evening, Marcus's aunt, Lady Verity Hargrave, arrived to serve as chaperone. She was a small woman with sharp eyes and a tongue like a pruning knife. She had not been told the full truth about Alina, only that she was a relative in need of protection. "A widow," Lady Verity said, looking Alina over with unconcealed suspicion. "How convenient! And how long did the dear departed husband survive?" 2 years, Alina said calmly. "He was a naval officer. He died at sea." "They all die at sea," Lady Verity muttered. But she agreed to stay, mostly because Marcus had promised her a new carriage if she behaved. The first dinner was a trial. 6 guests, all carefully selected for their influence rather than their kindness. Lord and Lady Ashcombe attended, he a widower with political ambitions, she a distant cousin who served as his hostess. Also present was Mrs. Helena Rotham, a wealthy widow who collected secrets the way other women collected china, and Sir Geoffrey Pemberton, an aging baronet with connections to the Lord Chancellor's office. Alina performed beautifully. She spoke little, but when she did, her words were measured and intelligent. She listened with an attention that made each guest feel important. She did not simper or flatter. She did not rise to the veiled insults that Lady Ashcombe sent her way. By the end of the evening, Sir Geoffrey was visibly charmed. Mrs. Rotham was intrigued. Lord Ashcombe could not stop looking at her. Marcus noticed. He noticed the way Ashcombe's eyes followed Alina across the room. He noticed the way the man leaned closer when she spoke. It was not jealousy, Marcus told himself. It was simply concern for her safety. Ashcombe was a political creature, known for trading favors and discarding people when they ceased to be useful. After the guests departed, Alina stood alone in the drawing room, her back to the dying fire. Marcus entered and closed the door. "Ashcombe is dangerous," he said. Alina turned. "I know. He offered me his protection this evening." Marcus felt his jaw tighten. "And your answer?" "I told him I was in mourning and had no need of protection beyond that which my cousin provides." She paused. He did not seem pleased. Marcus moved closer. "Ashcombe does not like to be refused. He will see it as a challenge." "Then let him." Alina's eyes glittered in the firelight. "I have faced worse than a man who cannot accept a polite decline." They stood in silence for a moment. The house creaked around them. Outside, a carriage rumbled past, its wheels splashing through standing water. "I have learned something," Marcus said finally. "The man who carried the forged letters, the third party named in the confession, he is alive. He works now as a clerk in a shipping office near the docks." Alina's expression did not change, but her hands curled into fists at her sides. "Then we find him." "We will," Marcus said. "But we must be careful. If he still serves the people who orchestrated the forgery, he will not come willingly." "No one ever does," Alina said. That night, as Alina retired to her room, she found an envelope on the floor beneath her door. The paper was cheap, the handwriting crude. Inside was a single sentence: "Leave London or be buried in it." She did not wake Marcus. She did not cry or ring for the servants. She folded the note, tucked it into her sleeve, and spent the rest of the night sitting in a chair with her back to the wall, watching the window. When Marcus found her in the morning, she was still awake. She handed him the note without a word. His face went white with anger. "Who brought this?" he demanded. "I do not know. It was already there when I retired." Marcus crushed the paper in his fist. "You should have called for me." Alina stood. "I am not afraid of threats written on cheap paper. But I wanted you to know that the people we are hunting have started hunting us." The next night, Marcus and Alina attended a ball at the home of the Marquis of Denham. It was a calculated risk. Alina needed to be seen to establish her presence before the ton. She wore dark green silk, which was bold for a widow but not scandalous. Her hair was dressed simply, without ornament. She looked like a woman who did not need jewels to be noticed. And noticed she was. The whispers began almost immediately. Who was the dark-haired widow on the arm of the Duke of Thornmere? Why had no one seen her before? Where was her family? For an hour, Alina navigated the room with Marcus at her side. She danced twice, once with Sir Geoffrey, once with a young viscount whose conversation consisted entirely of hunting dogs. She endured the stares and the murmurs. She did not falter. Then Lord Ashcombe approached, a glass of wine in his hand, his smile too smooth. "Mrs. Gray," he said, his voice carrying just enough to draw attention. "How delightful to see you again. But I confess, I am confused. I have made inquiries, and I can find no record of any Gray family in Cumberland matching your description." The room seemed to still. Alina felt the eyes of the ton upon her, sharp and hungry. She lifted her chin. "Then perhaps your inquiries were insufficient, my lord. There are many families in Cumberland whose records are not easily found." Ashcombe's smile widened. "Indeed, but there are no families at all, I think, that match you." He took a step closer. "Tell me, Mrs. Gray, what is your real name?" The silence stretched. Alina could feel Marcus tense beside her, could sense the storm building in him. But she did not look at him. She looked directly into Ashcombe's eyes. "My name," she said quietly, "is none of your concern." And she turned and walked away, leaving the room buzzing like a disturbed hive. Marcus followed her to the terrace, where the cool night air hit her face like a wave. She stood at the stone railing, her hands gripping the edge, her breath coming fast. "I should not have brought you here," Marcus said. Alina shook her head. "You brought me because I asked you to, because I cannot hide forever, because the truth is the only weapon I have left." She turned to face him. In the moonlight, her eyes were bright with unshed tears, not of weakness but of fury. "Let them question me," she said. "Let them whisper. Let them dig. They will find nothing because they do not know what to look for. And when the truth comes out, they will remember this night and realize they were standing in the presence of a woman they tried to bury." Marcus reached out and took her hand. It was cold. She did not pull away. "Then we bury them instead," he said quietly. Part 4. The Price of Silence. The morning after the ball, the gossip sheets were relentless. "Mysterious widow baffles the ton," read one. "A lady without a past," read another. The more respectable papers merely hinted at irregularities, but the message was clear. Alina Vane, under her borrowed name, had become a curiosity, and curiosities in London society rarely survived long. Alina read the papers at the breakfast table, her expression calm. She buttered a piece of toast with deliberate precision and took a small bite before setting it down. "I have been called worse," she said. Marcus stood by the window, watching the street below. A carriage had passed the house 3 times since dawn. "You will not go out today. It is not safe." "I did not plan to." Alina folded the paper and pushed it aside. "But I will not remain a prisoner in this house either. I have been a prisoner before. I will not be one again." Marcus turned. "This is different. These people will not lock you in a room. They will destroy you in public, and they will enjoy it." Alina met his gaze. "Then give me something to do. Let me help find the clerk. Let me be part of this fight instead of a piece on a board being moved by others." The request caught him off guard. He had assumed she would want to stay hidden, to let him handle the danger. But Elinor Vane was not a woman who hid. "Very well," he said. "We leave for the docks in an hour. Wear something plain. We will not travel in the ducal carriage." The streets near the Thames were a different London, narrow lanes, leaning buildings, the smell of tar and fish and coal smoke. Marcus had traded his fine coat for a plain gray jacket. Elinor wore a dark dress and a shawl pulled over her head, looking for all the world like a tradesman's wife. They walked close together, saying little, alert to every sound. The shipping office was a cramped room above a chandler's shop. A thin clerk with ink-stained fingers looked up as they entered. His face went pale when he saw Marcus, not because he recognized the Duke, but because he recognized Elinor. "Miss Vane," he whispered. Elinor stepped forward. "So you do remember me, Mr. Barlow." The clerk's hands trembled. He glanced toward the door as if measuring the distance. Marcus moved to block it. "I have nothing to say," Barlow said. "I was paid for a service. I did not know what the letters contained." "You knew enough," Elinor said. "You knew my father was innocent. You watched him be taken away. You watched my mother weep in the courtroom, and you said nothing." Barlow's face crumpled. "They would have killed me. The men who hired me, they were not gentlemen. They were not playing parlor games." "Who hired you?" Marcus demanded. Barlow shook his head. "I cannot. If I speak, I am a dead man." Elinor took another step forward. She reached into her sleeve and produced a small pistol, which she placed on the desk between them. The clerk's eyes went wide. "Then perhaps," she said quietly, "you should fear me more." For a long moment, no one moved. Then Barlow let out a shuddering breath. "It was a woman," he whispered. "She came to me herself, elegant, cold, with eyes like a hawk. She said the evidence would be planted in your father's study, and I was to retrieve it at a signal and bring it to the authorities." "What woman?" Elinor demanded. "I do not know her name, but I saw her once later at a ball at Hardwick House. She wore a silver gown and stood beside the old lady. I asked who she was. They told me she was Lady Hardwick's companion." Barlow paused. "But the way she spoke to the old lady, the way the servants bowed to her, she was more than a companion. She was the one giving orders." Elinor went very still. Lady Hardwick. The name fell like a stone into still water. Marcus knew her, the Dowager Marchioness of Hardwick, a woman of immense wealth and influence, a fixture in London society for 40 years. She had been a friend of his grandmother. She had dined at Thornmere Hall when Marcus was a boy. She had even sent a letter of condolence when his father died. "This cannot be," Marcus said. "Lady Hardwick is—" "A monster," Elinor finished. She turned to Barlow. "You will testify in front of witnesses. You will tell the truth." Barlow's eyes darted to the pistol. "I will, I swear it, but you must protect me. If she learns I have spoken, I am already dead." Marcus stepped forward. "You will come with us. Now, you will be kept in a secure location until this matter is resolved." Barlow nodded, his face slick with sweat. He gathered his coat with shaking hands and followed them out of the office, down the narrow stairs, into the waiting carriage. That night, as they sat in the drawing-room of the Cavendish Square house, Marcus stared into the fire. Elinor sat opposite him, the pistol now safely locked away, her hands folded in her lap. "Lady Hardwick," he said slowly, "why, what did your family ever do to her?" Elinor was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "My mother was a beautiful woman. Before she married my father, she received an offer from a young nobleman. She refused him. The nobleman was humiliated. He married another woman, but he never forgot." Marcus frowned. "Who was the nobleman?" "I do not know. My mother never told me his name. She only said he was a man who did not take rejection well." Elinor looked at him. "What if that nobleman was your father?" The fire crackled. Somewhere in the house a clock ticked. "And Lady Hardwick," Marcus said slowly, "was his protector, his ally." Elinor nodded, or his partner. They sat in silence, the weight of the revelation pressing down on them both. The path ahead was clear now, but it was also more dangerous than ever. Lady Hardwicke would not go quietly. She had buried the truth once. She would bury it again, and them with it. Marcus leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. Tomorrow we present the confession to the Lord Chancellor. We have Barlow's testimony. We have the document. We have enough. Elinor looked at him. Do we? Lady Hardwicke has spent 40 years building a fortress of influence. We have one damaged clerk and a confession from a dead man. If we fail, we do not just lose the case. We lose everything. Marcus reached across and took her hand. Her fingers were cold again, but they curled around his. Then we will not fail, he said. The next morning a letter arrived. It was delivered by a liveried footman in the Hardwicke livery, deep blue and gold. The seal was the Hardwicke crest, pressed into blood-red wax. Marcus opened it. The message was brief. Your Grace, I believe we have much to discuss. I invite you and your guests to dine at Hardwicke House this Friday evening. It is my sincere hope that we can resolve our differences without public unpleasantness. Yours in friendship, Cordelia Hardwicke. Marcus read the letter twice, then he handed it to Elinor. She read it, and her face grew very still. A truce, she said, or a trap? Marcus nodded, both. He walked to the window and looked out at the gray London sky. Somewhere beyond the rooftops, Hardwicke House waited like a spider at the center of its web. We will go, he said, but we will not go unarmed. Part 5. The Enemy in Satin. Before they could reach Hardwicke House, Lady Hardwicke struck. It began with a whisper campaign so effective that within 3 days, Elinor's invitations had dried up entirely. The rumors came from nowhere and everywhere at once. Elinor Vane was a madwoman. She had been locked in an asylum. She had escaped. She had assumed a false identity. She was dangerous. She was a fraud. The door knocker of the Cavendish Square house fell silent. Servants at neighboring houses were instructed not to speak with Marcus's staff. The few acquaintances Elinor had made in London now crossed the street rather than meet her eye. Elinor took the blow with the same quiet dignity she had shown at the ball. She did not weep or rage. She simply began packing her belongings. Marcus found her in her room, a small trunk open on the bed, her few possessions folded neatly inside. She was placing a worn copy of a poetry book on top of the pile when he entered. "What are you doing?" he demanded. Elinor did not look up. "I am leaving. It is the only sensible course. While I remain here, I bring shame to your household. Your aunt has already received letters advising her to return to Bath. Your servants are being harassed, and you will be dragged down with me." Marcus crossed the room in 3 strides and closed the trunk lid. "You are not leaving." Elinor looked at him then, and there was something raw in her eyes. "You cannot keep me here, Your Grace. I have spent too many years being kept." "I am not keeping you," Marcus said. "I am asking you to stay. There is a difference." "Is there?" Elinor's voice was quiet but unyielding. "You brought me here to help your cause. The cause is now lost. The world believes I am a madwoman. No court will listen to me. No society will receive me. The only remaining move is retreat." Marcus took her by the shoulders. "The only remaining move is to fight, and I cannot fight without you." Elinor stood very still. Her eyes searched his face, looking for something, weakness perhaps, or deception. She found neither. "Why?" she asked. "Why do you care what happens to me?" The question hung in the air. Marcus felt the answer rising in his chest, unfamiliar and undeniable. He had broken a lock and found a woman. But somewhere in the weeks since, the woman had ceased to be a responsibility and become something else entirely. "Because you are the only person in this city who tells me the truth," he said, "and I cannot let you go." Elinor's hand came up and covered his. Her touch was cool, steady. For a long moment, they stood in the fading afternoon light, surrounded by half-packed trunks and broken reputations. Then Alina stepped back. Then we fight, but we do it my way. She walked to the desk and picked up a sheet of paper. We accept Lady Hardwicke's invitation. We present the confession, and we make her deny it in front of witnesses so powerful that even she cannot spin the tale away. Marcus frowned. If she denies it, we are finished. The document is old. The witnesses are unreliable. Without her admission, we have nothing. Then we must force an admission, Alina said. She picked up a quill and dipped it in ink. I have an idea, but it will require you to trust me. The night of the dinner arrived cold and clear. Hardwicke House stood at the end of a long drive in St. James's Square, its facade lit by rows of torches. The windows glowed with candlelight, but the warmth was an illusion. The house was a fortress built of smiles and secrets. Marcus and Alina entered together. Alina wore black silk with a high collar and long sleeves, as if she were already in mourning for the evening to come. Marcus wore his finest evening dress, but beneath his coat he carried a loaded pistol, not because he intended to use it, but because Alina had insisted. If she tries to separate us, Alina had said earlier, you must not let her, and if she tries to harm you, you must be ready. Now, as the footman led them through the marble hall, Alina walked with her head high and her hands steady. The great doors to the dining room swung open. Lady Hardwicke awaited them. She was smaller than Alina had imagined, a slight woman in gray satin, with white hair piled high and eyes that held no warmth. But there was power in her stillness, in the way she did not rise as they entered, in the way she let them approach like supplicants. Your Grace, she said, her voice dry as old parchment, and Miss Vane, I had wondered if you would come. I did not realize I had been given a choice, Alina said. Lady Hardwicke's mouth curved. There is always a choice, my dear. The question is whether one has the wisdom to make the right one. She gestured to the table which was set for 3. Sit, we have much to discuss. The first course was served in silence. Alina watched the dowager from beneath lowered lashes, cataloging every detail. The way she held her knife, the rings on her fingers, the slight tremor in her left hand that betrayed age or illness. Marcus sat rigid beside her, his food untouched. Finally, Lady Hardwicke spoke. I will be direct. You possess a document that could cause a great deal of difficulty. I am prepared to offer you a substantial sum in exchange for it, enough to leave England and start anew, enough to forget. Alina set down her fork. I have no interest in money. No, of course not. Lady Hardwicke's tone was almost bored. You want justice, vengeance, the restoration of your family name, very noble, but let me offer you a truth. The world does not care about justice. It cares about survival, and I have survived longer than most. Marcus's jaw tightened. You destroyed her family. You forged evidence. You had an innocent man driven to his death. I had a man who rejected my daughter driven to his death, Lady Hardwicke corrected. Her eyes flicked to Alina. Your mother was engaged to the late Duke of Thornmere. Did you know that? They were to be married. Then she met your father and broke the engagement. The Duke never recovered. He married another woman, but he loved your mother until the day she died. The words fell like stones into the silence. Alina felt her chest constrict. Her mother had never spoken of the engagement, had never told her that the Duke of Thornmere had been the spurned suitor. And you, Alina asked, what was your role in this tragedy? Lady Hardwicke leaned back in her chair. I was the Duke's confidant, his protector. When he told me what your mother had done, I could not bear to see him suffer, so I arranged for the evidence. I paid the witnesses. I destroyed your father. A faint smile crossed her lips. It was easier than I expected. Alina stood. Her legs were trembling, but her voice was steady. You destroyed my family because my mother chose love over obligation. You killed my father because a man's pride was wounded, and you locked me in a room for 7 years to protect your secret. Lady Hardwicke looked up at her. "And now you wish to destroy me. But let me ask you, Miss Vane, what would your mother say if she could see you now? Would she be proud of the path you have chosen? Would she be proud of the man you have aligned yourself with, the son of the man who ruined her?" Elinor turned and walked toward the door. Marcus rose to follow, but Lady Hardwicke's voice stopped them both. "One more thing," the Dowager said. "The clerk you found, Mr. Barlow, he has been located. He will not be testifying. I made certain of that this afternoon." Marcus spun around. "What have you done?" Lady Hardwicke shrugged. "I have done what is necessary to protect what is mine." Elinor stood at the door, her hand on the latch. The words washed over her, but she did not flinch. She had spent 7 years in a locked room learning how to survive monsters. She turned to face Lady Hardwicke. "You have taken everything from me," Elinor said quietly. "My father, my freedom, my name. And now you think you have taken my last chance at justice, but you are mistaken." She opened the door. The corridor beyond was empty, but from the shadows stepped 2 men in the dark robes of the Lord Chancellor's office. "Lady Hardwicke," Elinor said, "you have just confessed to conspiracy, forgery, and murder, and every word was witnessed." The Dowager's face went white. Marcus stared at Elinor, understanding flooding through him. She had known the men were there. She had arranged it. Somehow, in the hours before the dinner, she had arranged for witnesses to be hidden in the house. Elinor met his eyes. "You told me to trust you," she said. "I asked you to trust me. This is what trust looks like." She turned back to Lady Hardwicke, who sat frozen at the table. Her mask of control cracked at last. "You should have taken the money," Elinor said. "I did not come here to negotiate. I came here to end this." Part 6. The Dinner of Lies. The men from the Lord Chancellor's office were not there by chance. Elinor had spent the morning before the dinner writing letters to Sir Geoffrey Pemberton, who had connections in the court, and to Mrs. Helena Rotham, whose network of secret keepers extended into every level of government. She had asked for official witnesses to be stationed in the house during the dinner, hidden in the adjoining room behind a false wall that the Hardwicke servants used for discreet observations. Mrs. Rotham had known about the hidden panel. Mrs. Rotham knew about everything. Now those witnesses stepped into the dining room, their expressions grim. The senior official, a Mr. Harrow, bowed to Elinor with something like awe. "Miss Vane," he said, "we heard everything. The confession, the admission of forgery, the threats against your person. It will be presented to the Lord Chancellor this very night." Lady Hardwicke had not moved from her chair. She sat with her hands folded on the table, her face pale but composed. Only her eyes betrayed her. They glittered with a cold, calculating fury. "You planned this," she said slowly, "from the moment you received my invitation." Elinor met her gaze. "You thought I would come here frightened and desperate, ready to trade my silence for a pile of coins. But I have had 7 years to prepare for this. 7 years to think about what I would say to the people who destroyed my family." Lady Hardwicke's mouth tightened. "You are a fool. One dinner party is not a trial. I have allies who will never let this see the light of day." "You have fewer allies than you think," Marcus said quietly. "The men you bribed 7 years ago are old now. They have families. They have secrets of their own. When the confession becomes public, they will turn on you to save themselves." The Dowager's gaze shifted to him. "And you stand beside her as if you are blameless. Your father was the one who locked her in that room. Your father was the one who forged the evidence. The apple has not fallen far from the tree, whatever you may tell yourself." Marcus stepped forward. "My father's sins are mine to correct. That is why I am here." "How noble," Lady Hardwicke said. "And how convenient that correcting his sins means possessing a young woman of remarkable beauty and spirit. Tell me, Miss Vane, has he offered you marriage yet? Or does he prefer to keep you as a ward, close enough to admire but not close enough to cost him his reputation?" The insult landed like a slap. Elinor felt heat rise in her face, but she did not flinch. The Duke has been nothing but honorable, which is more than can be said for anyone else in this room." Lady Hardwicke laughed, a brittle, ugly sound. "Honor, you still believe in such things, how charming. Let me tell you something, child. Honor is a word men use when they want women to be quiet. Your mother learned that too late, so will you." Elinor turned away. She had heard enough. The officials escorted them out of Hardwicke House while a cold rain began to fall. The carriage waited in the drive, its lamps glowing through the mist. Marcus helped Elinor inside, then climbed in beside her. The door closed and they were alone. For a long time, neither spoke. The carriage moved through the darkened streets, the wheels hissing on the wet cobbles. Elinor stared out the window, watching the lights of London pass like dreams. "She was telling the truth about my mother," Elinor said finally. "The engagement, the rejection, your father loved my mother." Marcus nodded. "I believe he did. And when she chose another man, he let his pride turn into poison. It does not excuse what he did, but it explains it." Elinor turned to look at him. In the dim light of the carriage, his face was shadowed, his eyes unreadable. She thought of all the ways this man had surprised her, breaking the lock, believing her story, standing beside her when the world turned against them. "I did not expect to trust you," she said. "After what your father did, I did not expect to trust anyone with your name." "And now?" Marcus asked. Elinor held his gaze. "Now I trust you with more than my name." The carriage rolled on, carrying them through the rain-soaked streets toward Cavendish Square. The confession was in the hands of officials. The witnesses had heard everything. For the first time in 7 years, Elinor felt the heavy door of her past beginning to crack open. But Lady Hardwicke was not finished. Elinor knew it as surely as she knew her own heartbeat. The Dowager would not go quietly into the dark. She would fight, and she would use every weapon she possessed. The question was whether Elinor had the strength to survive another battle. When they reached the house, Elinor moved toward the stairs, intending to retire to her room. But Marcus caught her hand. "Wait," he said. She turned. They stood in the dark entrance hall, the only light coming from a single candle on the side table. The rain had stopped, and the house was so quiet that Elinor could hear the whisper of their breathing. "Something Lady Hardwicke said," Marcus began, "about marriage, about what I want from you." Elinor's heart quickened. "She said many things, most of them lies." "But not all." Marcus stepped closer. "She was right about one thing. I have been a coward. I have hidden behind duty and honor because I was afraid of what I feel for you." Elinor's breath caught. "What do you feel?" Marcus reached out and touched her face. His fingers were warm against her cold skin. The candlelight flickered, sending shadows dancing across the walls. "I feel as though I have been asleep for 6 years," he said. "And you have woken me. I feel as though every locked door in my life has been waiting for you to walk through it. I feel as though I would burn the world to keep you safe, and that terrifies me, because I have never felt anything like it." Elinor stood very still. The words washed over her, and she realized she had been waiting to hear them since the moment he kicked open the door in the east wing. "I have been alone for 7 years," she whispered. "Not just in that room. Before that, after my father died, I was alone in my grief. My mother was gone. My home was gone. Everything I loved was taken from me, and I learned to survive by building walls around my heart." She took his hand and pressed it to her chest. "But you broke those walls too, and I do not know how to be this person, this woman who wants something for herself, this woman who wants you." Marcus's eyes searched hers. "Then let me teach you." He leaned down and Elinor rose to meet him. Their lips met in the dark hall, soft and tentative at first, then deeper. The candle flickered. The house held its breath. When they finally pulled apart, Elinor was trembling, not from fear, but from the sheer overwhelming force of what she felt. "There is still so much to be done," she said. "The trial, the witnesses, Lady Hardwicke's allies if we fail." "We will not fail," Marcus said. But if the worst should happen, if we lose everything, I need you to know that I would still choose this. I would still choose you." Elinor looked up at him and she smiled. It was a small smile, fragile and real. "Then we will not lose," she said. The next morning, the city was alive with scandal. The story had broken before dawn. The confession, the hidden witnesses, the dramatic dinner at Hardwick House, every detail had been leaked to the papers within hours. By mid-morning, the streets were thick with newsboys shouting headlines. "Dowager confesses to vain conspiracy. Scandal rocks London society. Daughter kept prisoner for 7 years." Lady Hardwick had fled London before sunrise. Her servants arrived at Hardwick House to find the Dowager's rooms empty, her jewels gone, and a single letter left on the dining table. "I will return when this world remembers its place." The letter was handed to the authorities. The hunt began. Elinor read the headlines in silence, standing at the window of Marcus's study. The city below looked the same as it always did, carriages rattling, pedestrians hurrying, smoke rising from chimneys. But everything had changed. She was no longer a hidden girl. She was Elinor Vane, the woman who had survived. Marcus came up behind her and placed a hand on her shoulder. "The Lord Chancellor has called a private hearing. The confession will be examined. Barlow has agreed to testify despite Lady Hardwick's threats. He is under guard now." Elinor nodded. "And if the hearing goes against us?" "It will not." Marcus turned her to face him. "The witnesses heard everything. The evidence is overwhelming, but the hearing is only the beginning. Lady Hardwick still has allies. They will try to discredit you, to claim the confession was coerced or forged. You must be prepared for that." Elinor lifted her chin. "I have been prepared for that since the night I refused to sign my name to a lie." She stepped away from the window and moved to the desk, where the original confession lay beneath a sheet of glass. The document that had ruined her family now sat in the open, exposed to the light. "There is something I have not told you," she said quietly. "Something Lady Hardwick said at the dinner, about my mother." Marcus waited. "She said my mother was engaged to your father," Elinor continued. "That she broke the engagement to marry my father, but she did not tell me the rest. She did not tell me that my mother and your father met again, years later, after my father's death." Marcus frowned. "What do you mean?" Elinor turned to face him. "I found letters in my mother's old trunk, which I kept hidden in the East Wing. Letters from your father written after the scandal. He offered to help her. He offered to clear my father's name, but my mother refused. She was too proud, too angry, and so the truth stayed buried." Marcus's jaw tightened. "You never told me this." "I did not know how." Elinor's voice cracked. "I did not know how to tell you that your father tried to do the right thing in the end, and my mother would not let him. I did not know how to tell you that I have spent years hating a man who might have been trying to save us." The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken pain. Then Marcus crossed the room and took her in his arms. "I do not care about the past," he said. "I care about you. Whatever our parents did, whatever they failed to do, it does not define us. We are not them." Elinor buried her face in his chest. "How do you know?" "Because we are here," Marcus said. "Because I chose to open that door and you chose to walk through it. Because we have both spent 7 years in different kinds of prisons, and somehow we found each other anyway." Elinor pulled back and looked at him. Her eyes were bright with tears she refused to shed. "Then let us end this," she said. "Let us present the evidence and make them listen. Let us close the door on the past and open a new one." Marcus pressed his forehead to hers. "Together." The private hearing was set for the following Thursday. Marcus and Elinor spent the intervening days preparing, reviewing the confession, coaching Barlow on his testimony, gathering corroborating witnesses. The city watched and waited, hungry for the next chapter of the scandal. On the morning of the hearing, Elinor dressed in black, not for mourning, but for strength. She pinned her hair up with silver combs that had belonged to her mother. She looked at herself in the mirror and saw not a prisoner but a woman who had walked through fire and emerged unburned. Marcus waited for her at the bottom of the stairs. He wore his ducal robes for the first time since his father's funeral. His expression was serious, but his eyes softened when he saw her. "You look like a queen," he said. Elinor smiled. "I feel like a woman about to reclaim her life." They rode to the hearing in silence, the city passing by in a blur of gray and brown. The building where the hearing would take place was a grand stone edifice with columns and steps. A crowd had gathered outside, reporters and curious onlookers jostling for position. They pressed forward as Marcus helped Elinor from the carriage, their questions a roar of noise. Elinor did not pause. She walked up the steps with her head high, her hand in Marcus. The doors opened before them, and they entered the hall of judgment. Inside, the chamber was cold and formal. The Lord Chancellor sat at a raised desk, flanked by two senior judges. The witnesses sat in rows below, their faces a mixture of curiosity and expectation. And in the gallery, half hidden behind a curtain, Elinor glimpsed a familiar face, Lord Ashcombe, watching with narrowed eyes. She did not look away. She met his gaze and held it until he turned aside. The hearing began. The confession was read into the record. Barlow gave his testimony in a shaking voice, describing the night he planted the forged letters, the money he received, the woman who had hired him. Elinor listened with her hands clasped in her lap, her expression still. Then Marcus rose to speak. He stood before the Lord Chancellor and told the story of the locked door, the hidden girl, the 7 years of silence. He did not spare his own father. He confessed the Duke's crimes in a clear, steady voice, and he asked the court to restore the Vane name and grant Elinor the justice she had been denied. When he finished, the chamber was silent. Then the Lord Chancellor turned to Elinor. "Miss Vane, do you wish to speak?" Elinor rose. She walked to the center of the room and faced the men who held her fate in their hands. "I was 17 years old when my father was taken from me," she said. "I was 17 when I was locked in a room and told that my silence would keep my mother's grave safe. I am 24 now. I have spent 7 years in the dark, waiting for the world to remember that I existed. I am not asking for vengeance. I am asking for the truth to be recognized. I am asking for my father's name to be cleared. I am asking to walk out of the shadows and stand in the light." Her voice did not waver. Her hands did not tremble. She stood before them like a flame in the cold stone chamber, and every man in the room felt the heat of her dignity. The Lord Chancellor looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. "The evidence is clear," he said. "The confession is valid. The testimony is corroborated. The court rules that the charges against Sir Richard Vane were false, and his name is hereby restored. The Vane estate, including all properties and holdings, is returned to his only surviving heir, Miss Elinor Vane." The words echoed in the silent chamber. Elinor felt her knees weaken. Marcus was beside her in an instant, his hand on her elbow, steadying her. "It is done," he whispered. Elinor looked at him, and for the first time the tears came. They spilled down her cheeks, hot and unbidden, and she did not try to stop them. "It is done," she repeated. Part 7. The Open Door. The restoration of the Vane name sent shockwaves through London society. Within a week, Elinor Vane had become the most talked-about woman in England. The newspapers that had once mocked her now printed retractions and apologies. The hostesses who had crossed the street to avoid her now sent invitations by the dozen. The same people who had whispered that she was a madwoman now praised her courage, her dignity, her remarkable resilience. Elinor received their letters with quiet amusement and threw most of them into the fire. "They are like weather vanes," she said to Marcus one afternoon. "They turn whichever way the wind blows." "And the wind now blows in your favor," Marcus replied. "You are a wealthy woman, Elinor. The Vane estate includes lands in Kent, a house in Bath, and an income sufficient to maintain a very comfortable life. You have options." Alina set down the letters and looked at him. Do you think I care about any of that? Marcus moved toward her. I think you care about justice, and you have it, but I also think you have not yet decided what comes next. Alina was silent for a moment. The drawing room of the Cavendish Square house had become a sanctuary of sorts, a place where she could breathe, think, plan. But it was not her home. Not yet. I have spent 7 years dreaming of freedom, she said. I imagined traveling, seeing the places my father loved, reading books without fear of interruption. I imagined a quiet life, far from the city and its cruelty. But now that I have freedom, I find I want something else. What is that? Marcus asked. Alina met his eyes. I want to stay. The words hung between them, simple and devastating. Marcus crossed the room and took her hands in his. Then stay, he said. Not as my ward, not as my guest, stay as my wife. Alina's heart stuttered. Your wife? I have wanted to ask you since the night of the dinner, since before that, since the moment you looked at me in that locked room and did not flinch. Marcus's voice was low, urgent. I love you, Alina. Not because I pity you, not because I feel responsible for you. I love the woman you are, the woman who refused to sign a lie, who walked through fire and did not burn, who taught me that strength is not the absence of fear but the refusal to let it win. Alina felt the tears rising again, but she blinked them back. I do not want to be saved, Marcus. I do not want to be the woman you rescued. I want to be your equal, your partner. I want to know that you see me, not as a victim, but as a woman who chose you freely. Marcus lifted her hands to his lips and kissed her fingers. You are my equal in every way. You are the only woman who has ever looked at me and seen the man behind the title. You are the only person who has ever made me want to be better. I do not want to save you, Alina. I want to build a life with you. Alina smiled through her tears. Then yes, I will marry you. They were married quietly in the chapel at Thornmere Hall 3 months later. The ceremony was small, only a handful of guests, all carefully chosen. Lady Verity attended, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief and complaining that the flowers were not properly arranged. Sir Geoffrey Pemberton stood as witness. Mrs. Helena Rotham sent a silver tea service with a note that read, You owe me a secret or two, my dear. I expect to be consulted on all future scandals. Lord Ashcombe was not invited. He had left London shortly after the hearing, his political ambitions in ruins. Rumors said he had gone to the continent, where he was attempting to rebuild his reputation. Alina did not spare him a thought. After the ceremony, Marcus and Alina walked together through the gardens at Thornmere. The spring air was warm, heavy with the scent of roses and new grass. The house stood behind them, its windows glinting in the afternoon light. There is something I must do, Alina said, before we leave. Marcus knew what she meant. He took her hand and led her through the garden, around the side of the house to the east wing. The door that had once been locked stood open now, its splintered frame replaced, its hinges oiled. The corridor beyond was bright with sunlight. Alina stepped inside. The room where she had spent 7 years was no longer a prison. The bars had been removed from the window. The old bed had been replaced with a writing desk. The walls had been painted a soft cream. The only reminder of the past was the book of poetry that Alina had read so many times the pages were soft as cloth. She picked it up and held it to her chest. I used to read this by the light of a single candle, she said. I memorized every line. I thought the words would drive me mad, but they kept me sane. They reminded me that there was beauty in the world, even when I could not see it. Marcus came to stand behind her. Do you want me to close this room forever? Alina shook her head. No, I want it to remain open. I want people to know what happened here. I want them to understand that secrets like my father's cannot stay buried forever. She turned to face him. The truth is not something to be hidden. It is something to be shared. That is what I have learned. Marcus kissed her forehead. Then we will share it together. They left the room and walked back into the sunlight. The east wing stood behind them, its door open to the world. The past would always be part of them, but it would not define them. As they reached the garden, Elinor stopped and looked up at the sky. The sun was beginning to set, painting the clouds in shades of gold and rose. The air smelled of earth and flowers and the faint promise of rain. "What are you thinking?" Marcus asked. Elinor turned to him and smiled. "I am thinking that I have spent 7 years waiting for my life to begin, but it began the moment you opened that door." Marcus pulled her into his arms. "Then let us not waste another moment." They kissed in the fading light, surrounded by the beauty of a world they had both fought to reach. And in the distance, the open door of the east wing stood sentinel, no longer a symbol of imprisonment, but a reminder that even the darkest rooms could be filled with light. Epilogue. 6 months later, the Duchess of Thornmere stood on the steps of a newly restored manor house in Kent, her hand resting lightly on her husband's arm. The Vane estate, which had been seized and left to ruin, was alive again. Workers had repaired the roof, replanted the gardens, and painted the shutters a soft white. The name Vane gleamed once more above the entrance. Inside, Elinor walked through the rooms where she had spent her earliest childhood. She touched the walls, breathed in the scent of fresh paint and old wood. Her father's portrait hung in the study, restored from storage, his kind eyes following her as she moved. "He would be proud of you," Marcus said quietly. Elinor turned to him. "I hope so." She had not forgiven the men who destroyed her family. That was not in her nature. But she had found a way to live with the past, to carry it without letting it crush her. The truth had been told. The name had been restored. And now, at last, she was free. She reached for Marcus's hand, and together they walked out into the garden, where the roses bloomed in wild profusion, and the future stretched before them like an open door. The forbidden room was behind them. The world was ahead. And for the first time in 7 years, Elinor Vane was no longer hiding.